Fall fishing. Fall fishing has been a scam. There have been so many people over the years. I have to include myself in this mosh of people. Fall fishing has been a scam to get you to buy more fishing lures, more rods, more reels. It's been a scam to get you to click on videos, watch my stuff. Let me tell you about what fish are about to do during the fall. It's going to be this mass migration of fish that will come in like groves, like ducks down the Mississippi flyway, and they'll start to bite, and fishing is going to be magical as these bass go to the fall feed. That's what every video is about to start telling you for the next several weeks, maybe even a couple months. And I want to warn you about that. A lot of it is, I don't want to say a lot of it is false, but a lot of it lacks context. A lot of it lacks context. In my experience, when it comes to fall fishing, really not that much changes. For the most part, especially in lakes in the South, the Southeast, I'm going to say for most of the country, bass pretty much don't really go that much. They don't really go that far from where they live or where food is. They don't really go that far. They pretty much stay doing the same thing in the same places, biting the same lures for most of the year. I'm not going to say all of the year. That would be another exaggeration, just like what I'm claiming the fall transition to be. That would be exaggeration. But for the most part, there's no such thing as fall lures, the best 5 fall lures. There's really not that much of a transition. There's things that are happening, but to label them as a transition, and you need these lures for that transition, is a marketing scheme to get you to buy new things. So where I live here in South Carolina, for the most part, bass stay exactly where they are. June, July, August, September, October, going into November, they're pretty doggone close to where they've been all summer. They might not be exactly where they were in May, June, and July. They're pretty doggone close. And when I say close, I don't necessarily mean if I found a fish on a point that they stay on that point for 6 months. That's not what I'm talking about. But for the most part, if fish are using points, if fish are using ditches, if fish are using humps, they stay on that type of structure for most of the year, including the fall. So I'm not saying they stay on one location, but this idea that somehow there's a mass migration on Lake Hartwell, Lake Kiowee, Clark Seal, that they go from the rivers to the lake, from the main lake to the rivers, or vice versa. Let me tell y'all, that is a lie from the pits of marketing. That is a lie. It does not happen that way. Bass are not going from the rivers to the main lake and from the main lake to the rivers during the fall. There is no migration. There's none of that. There's a couple things that are going on. There's really only about 3 things that you need to know about fall fishing. Y'all know I have the Straight Up Fishing app, and we've been going into deep detail into these 3 things. They have several layers, way more that I could go to in a, 12, 15-minute video. Some of these items that I'm going to talk about are a series of videos that I have in the Straight Up Fishing app. One is about turnover. What really is turnover? The other one is about fishing lakes with current. And then there's lakes with different factors like shallower water, deeper water, all these things. There's all these things to consider when you're talking about fall fishing, so everything's in context. So in this video, what I want to do is I want to show you there's basically 3 things that happen on just about every lake during the fall time. And I want to say something, 99% of the fish, and I'm just grabbing a number out of the sky to sound cool, a lot of the fish, okay, that's probably a better way, a lot of the fish, they're not migrating. There's really only 3 things that's happening in most of our lakes, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. So y'all know I have the Straight Up Fishing app, and that's where I teach people how to fish, and we've been going deep into these 3 items for the last 2 weeks, and we're going to continue going on to it for the next month, talking about these, because it's more than I can describe and explain in a 12 or 15 minute video. A lot of y'all only watch about 3 or 4 minutes anyway. But in the app, we go into this, it may be 3 or 4 videos just on turnover or just on oxygen content. So it's hard to go into deep detail here, but I want to tell you these 3 things. Number 1, migration, transition, fall migration. For most of the lakes, for most of you people watching this video, that is a myth, and that's not really happening. Now, for my people that live in the Northeast or where there's ice out, yes, your fishing is much different. Hence why I said everything is in context. Fall fishing is not the same in the South as it is in the North or as it is in the Northwest. Everything is in context, and you have to break down fall fishing according to a lot of different things. Fall transitions and fall migrations just really don't happen in the South. They really don't. They really don't. Those fish aren't moving from one end of the lake to the other. They're really not moving from they're not going from the main lake to the creeks. If they do sometimes, and sometimes that may be the case, but there's a reason why fish may go from the main lake to a creek, or from the creek to the main lake. We don't talk about that enough. A lot of that has to do with oxygen content. So in the fall time, we get cooler days and we get shorter days. I'm gonna give you the Cliff Notes version. We did a whole 3 video series on this in the Straight Up Fishing app. Cooler water has the capacity to hold more oxygen content than warm water. Let's think about in the summertime. In the creeks and coves, there's more trees. It's more narrow. It's more protected. You know, in the wintertime, where do you go fishing in the wintertime on a windy day? You try to go in a little protected cove because it's warmer. Number 1, let's be real. You're out there, you getting your ears blown off on the main lake. You go in a cove where it's a little bit more protected and it's easier to fish because it feels warmer. And it's easier to fish too, but it feels warmer. You don't want to go out there and get blasted. Okay, think about that, how that applies in the summertime. When you go in a lot of the creeks, they're more protected. It's not as open. The trees have created a barrier where there's not as much wind. Therefore, you ever notice in the summertime, if you fish reservoirs in the Southeast, there's either fish on the main lake or you got to go way up the coon cow up the creek, way up the creek. And there's nothing in between. There's a reason for that, and it's oxygen content. Think about it. The open water has more accessibility to the wind and to the elements to turn it over, keep that water oxygenated. When you get inside the creeks, because of the barriers of the trees and there being less water there, a smaller water column, that oxygen level is depleted. So it just doesn't support life. Bait fish can't live there. Listen, it goes even deeper than that. You can't just say, well, the bait fish aren't there. What do the bait fish eat? We never study that. We do study the life cycle of bass. We study the life cycle sometimes of even the bait fish. But what do the bait fish eat? Bait fish eat a small microscopic, basically a plant, phytoplankton. We went into a deep dive in this on the app. It's talking about Cladocera, rotifers. These are microscopic little plants in the water. And we have to study what happens with that. If the water can't support that, then the fish don't go where the phytoplankton is. As summer comes and the water warms up, everything gets hotter, oxygen is depleted from the system. A smaller percentage of the lake can support life. Smaller percentage of the lake can support phytoplankton. Smaller percentage of the lake can support bait fish, blueback herring, threadfin shad, ciscos, golden shiner. Smaller percentage. Now only maybe 50% or 40% can. That's why fishing is a little bit tougher in the summer, because it's more dead water. So we have to adjust for that during the summertime. And then as the water cools again, more of the lake has oxygen content, which allows for that bait fish to move into some of those dead areas of the lake. And that's really the transition. There's not a migration like ducks or birds going from one end of the lake to the other. What's really happening is more of the lake is capable of supporting life. And so now we can catch them in the creeks. Now we can catch them in places that we couldn't catch them all summer long. But the caveat to that is a lot of times, some of our lakes, if you live on the Coosa River, you live on Logan Martin, Neely Henry, somewhere where it has a lot of current, those lakes, the water is always turning over and it's always oxygenated. So your migration route will look much different, or your transition, or this phenomenon I'm talking about, it looks completely different than it does for somebody that lives on a lake like me, on Lake Hartwell, where current is really not an issue. They do pull water at times, but it's not really a current deal here in the Carolinas. Our fish are always on the main lake. The most of the fish, the biggest majority is always on the main lake. So the idea that there's this mass migration, there's this big movement to shallow or deep, it's really just a myth. Okay, point number 2 that you need to remember. I've kind of already said it, but I want to go a little bit deeper here. Everything is in context. It's really important for you to understand what type of body of water are you fishing. You're probably seeing a lot of YouTube videos right now about fall turnover, what it is and what it does to the fish. And many people are studying these videos, not even realizing that your lake doesn't even have a fall turnover. Fall turnover happens more in reservoirs than it does in rivers, or shallow lakes, swamp lakes, or natural lakes. Some natural lakes do turnover. Okeechobee's not going to have a turnover. Lake Hartwell is going to have a turnover. Smith Lake in Alabama will have a turnover. Some place like, St. Clair or Champlain, I would say probably doesn't have a fall turnover because it has so much flow. If you're from the northeast of the country, let me know, does your lake have a fall turnover? Probably should address that. We go into deep detail in the app. What is a fall turnover? Fall turnover is basically this. You can also look it up on Google as stratification. Stratification is where you have a cool layer and a warm layer on the bottom, or warm layer on top and cool layer on bottom. Cool and warm don't mix. And basically what happens is when the surface temperature cools, those layers mix or flop. As we go into the winter, the warmer layer will be on the bottom and the cooler layer will be on the top. You can also see this on 2D sonar. If you still has anybody got it? Yeah, will y'all even turn on 2D sonar? We used to see it on our graphs all the time because it would look like static in the middle. And during the summer, all of your life, you'll see it. All your bait fish and everything, most of the time is above that layer of stratification. It's in the upper layer because that's where the oxygen is. Below that intermediate layer is oxygen depleted. You'll see no bait, you will see no fish, you will see nothing. All the fish will be above it, which is why fishing in the summer can be difficult. So if your lake doesn't have that, a lot of that information about it is not true. And so you need to really understand what type of lake you have. Something else about context. We need to pay attention to the species of fish. You got to pay attention to the species of fish that you're fishing for. So what I'm saying, one of the things that I mentioned in the very first part of this video was, hey, where I live, fish don't change much. They don't really even move that much. Why is that? It's because we have predominantly spotted bass and they love to live in the open water as much as possible. Spawning is not a big deal to them. They'll spawn if they have to. I'm not convinced that every fish in the lake spawns anyway every year. That's very controversial. You can hit me in the comments if you want to, but I don't think every fish in the lake spawns every year. Spotted bass, I really believe, super duper hate to spawn. I think they stay out there and eat most of the year. Some of them spawn, obviously, but I don't think a lot of them spawn. A lot of them stay out there on the main lake and they eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. They don't go far. And so when I say they don't go far, I don't mean, like I mentioned in the beginning, if they're on one point, they're on one shoal, if they're on one area of the lake, I don't mean that they stay there all year long on that point, on that hump, on that brush pile. But I am saying that for most of the year on Lake Lanier, fish are on brush piles in 20 to 40 foot of water. Can anybody that fishes Lake Lanier or Hartwell or any of the herring lakes, you probably can agree that most of your fish will stay on those brush piles or close by most of the year. Don't mean they stay on that same one in that same creek, but they pretty much stay in that same area all year. Smallmouth, for instance. When it comes to fall fishing for smallmouth, if you fish for smallmouth, you're probably fishing a different type of lake than what Lake Hartwell is. And I keep using Hartwell because that's where, this is just home. You probably are fishing a different style lake. There's river smallmouth, there's Great Lake smallmouth, there's a few reservoir smallmouth as well. But the fall transition, fall fishing is going to look completely different for you guys that fish for smallmouth, because of the type of lake that smallmouth usually thrive in. If you have a largemouth lake, largemouth kind of do the same thing for the most part all year long. If you live on the Tennessee River, there's probably some fish on those ledges all year long. If you live in Florida, the largemouth stay pretty much in the same spots all year long. Where's the grass at? Pretty much the same thing. Doesn't mean they stay on that same piece of grass and that same bank or that same little island, but they're probably in grass all year long. If your lake has a lot of docks, it's a good chance that them fish are on them docks all year long. There might be more fish on the docks in the spring than there is in the fall, but there's a good chance that the fish will be right where they've been all year going into this next period of the fall. So everything's about context. It depends on what the species is. It depends on what style of lake it is. It depends on where you are in the country. One video about fall fishing really probably is not going to help you as much as we are selling it to do it. You got to break it down to all the nuances. The last thing I want to talk about is lures. So with lures, that is one thing in fall fishing that you need to know. It doesn't really change. It's going to piss a lot of y'all off. It doesn't really change. There's really no such thing as a fall fishing lure. The best top 5 fishing lures, every lure you need to buy in the fall. Listen, it's not that certain lures work best in the fall. The reason those lures will maybe be more productive going into the next few weeks and months is because of where the fish are going to be. Let me give you an example. You remember I said as the water cools, more areas of that lake will have more oxygen, which means they'll have more bait fish, which means they'll have more bass. The reason that a buzzbait may work better for you going into the next several weeks and months is because now some of those creeks can support life. So there will be bait in some of those creeks around the laydowns, around the hydrilla in the creeks. So now you can take the buzzbait and actually get bit. Just saying that these top 5 lures are going to help you catch fish doesn't really give you enough context about what's actually happening on the lake and why you can catch fish on it. You could have caught a fish on a buzzbait back in June, back in July. But the context of where you needed to fish it might be a little bit different. So don't fall for the top 5 lures for fall fishing. In the fall fishing, you need to be throwing a spinnerbait. And during the fall, you need to be throwing these top waters. I've done those videos before, and the more I learn how to express what I'm trying to teach you, I've learned that that was a mistake. That was a mistake to teach fishing in that way. There's a deeper level of understanding than just top 5. That's a very blanket, elementary way to learn how to fish. Fall fishing is much more, it deserves better than that. I don't want to say it's more complicated because fishing really is simple. But fishing, you deserve to understand fishing better than top 5 lures for fall fishing. use these lures in October, use these lures in September. You deserve to know why those lures work. So try not to fall for the myths that these baits are best in the fall. You know why a crankbait is going to work really good for you in the fall? A lot of times, number one, the fish are going to, the bait fish is going to be a lot more active. I don't care what lake you're in, the bait fish is going to be really active because there's going to be more phytoplankton available and closer to the surface. And you have more surface activity because there's phytoplankton coming up to the surface looking for light because the days are shorter because of photo period. These are all things we talk about in the Straight Up Fishing app, which causes the bait to get more active, which causes the fish to be more active. So all of a sudden, there's more bait on these points. There's more bait around the docks. There's more bait around the creeks. The fish are focused on that. They're thinking about that. That is the prevalent, easy meal for them. It's going to be shad going into the next few weeks. And so, since that's the case, now all of a sudden, crankbaits will work really good on rocks or around grass or wherever. Also, where I live, I'm going to be honest with you. I probably won't throw a crankbait that much where I live. If you live on Neely Henry in Alabama, you might be getting ready to throw your crankbait a lot. Where I live, the crankbait won't be my first go. You know what it'll be? Probably be a drop shot, a jig and spoon, and a minnow, a jig head minnow. And before y'all say anything about my jig head minnow comment, we've been throwing jig head minnows since the 90s. Since the 90s. You can even watch on this YouTube channel. You can go back to 2018. You can see me putting the Streaks 375 on a Ned head, busting their heads. Okay, 2018. Ain't nobody talking about forward-facing sonar and minnows back then. That's not new. The reason I want to be using those baits is because those are baits that I can present as a shad imitator in really deep water. And a lot of our fish will be on brush piles and humps and timber lines over the next couple of weeks. So those are going to be my first grabs. If I were to go out and try to catch fish on crankbait like a lot of YouTube videos would tell you right now, it probably wouldn't work that good. I wouldn't catch that many fish. But where I live, because I have spotted bass as the predominant fish that I can catch, and because the bait is going to actually move deeper than shallower, that's going to be the bait that is going to catch the most fish for me. Context, it's everything. Don't fall for the videos that tell you that these lures will work. It depends on where you fish. It depends on what your species is. It depends on what area of the country you are. It's not one size fits all for fall fishing. Don't fall for the scam. If you want to learn more about what I'm talking about, join the Straight Up Fishing app. We do a fall fishing academy where we talk about all these nuances and break down every style of lake, every species of fish, because everything truly is in context when it comes to fishing.